Hi everybody, my name is Tim and welcome to my Biology 1 course at Mount San Antonio College. Let me first give you a quick basic protocol on how this might work to your advantage. In the link below in the comment section, I'll put a link to my website, and there you can find a PDF version of these lecture notes without the red words that you'll see coming up. And that way, if you would like, as you're watching the video, you can take notes. If you have not already done so, you might want to watch my video on how to study, and I explain kind of the part about the taking notes and writing, and that might be to your advantage. So first of all, why might you need to take Bio 1? Well, many of our students, and probably most of you fall in this category, take Bio 1 because it's a graduation or transfer requirement for you to move on with your life and get your degree and take your next thing. But from a sort of content basis of what we're going to cover in here, Bio 1 is quite important, I think, in the sense that we cover issues that relate to your health, and making good health decisions. We talk about the environment, which, whether you like it or not, ends up affecting everybody in a variety of different ways. We talk about environmental issues and how those might impact you. We talk about how science works and how maybe it doesn't work and how it can be misinterpreted. And we also talk about the kind of beauty, I think, of science in the sense that it sort of has this self-correcting system that even if the science is wrong, the mechanisms by which papers are published and scientists do research, it's very likely that that's going to be fixed at some point. So it has this sort of self-correcting system. And then you put sort of all that together, and to be sort of a good, responsible citizen and be able to vote and make important decisions, understanding about your health and the environment and how science works, those are going to make you better as a person, I believe, moving forward. So those are some reasons why, in addition to the graduation and transfer requirement, you might find Bio 1 to be important to you. So as we discuss this, biology, you probably already know, is a type of science. So when we talk about a science, anything that's a science, the information that information base is built upon is done so using what we call the scientific method. And in the scientific method, we have several steps that we utilize. First, we make some sort of observation about something. Then we generate what's called a hypothesis, which you probably have all heard of before, or you generate multiple hypotheses. And that's an educated guess or an idea that you can test. And then you can test out that hypothesis and see if it is right or wrong by doing an experiment. Then you get results, and then you can kind of come back and do that again. And once again, in the link down below in the comment section, I have a link to my website. And from there, if you're interested, I have my lecture notes, which are meant to go along with these videos. So you put those two together, and that gives you sort of the lecture content of what I would cover in a regular class. Okay, so you get results from there, and then you decide what to do. You might have an experiment on, do students do better when they sleep more or when they sleep less? And you could design an experiment where you test that out with, several different students and a particular test, and you can generate results. And then it can vary. What if that matters in a math test, but it doesn't matter in a biology test, and that kind of thing. So this kind of system is meant to be replicated and done over and over again. So even though you get answers with the scientific method, that doesn't have to be the conclusion. In fact, you expect that you generate more questions from that. When we talk about biology, you probably know that the word biology is a particular science where we're talking about the study of life. And living things have certain characteristics that other non-living things don't necessarily have, like rocks and pieces of metal and that sort of thing. So when we talk about living things, there are certain elements that come up that are important. So first of all living things that we will talk about will be made up of these smaller living pieces that are called cells, and that's related to a theory of biology we call the cell theory. We'll talk more about what the word theory means later on, but basically anything that's truly alive is at its smallest point is at the cell level. There are other things that we'll talk about, viruses and things of that sort, that are sort of on the edge of that, but not quite entirely meeting all the criteria. The other thing that living things are capable of doing is they are capable of evolving. And that's the theory of evolution. You might have heard of that as well. We'll discuss that more in later units coming up. But in this particular case, just to point out what we mean by the word evolution in the term, in terms of how biology uses it, is it's going to have a very specific definition of a genetic change that occurs in a group of organisms over some particular time period. So capable of changing, and we'll discuss the details of that later on. The other thing is that all living things come from other living things. So living things can reproduce and produce other living things. And that probably, if you think about it, could lead you to an interesting question. Well, where did the first living thing come from? And that's another interesting kind of science where you try to figure that portion of it out. But that's not quite what we'll discuss in this class because it sort of borders on the edge of biology and maybe chemistry and other forms of science. But everything that's been studied so far at this point that's alive comes from other living things. And then another feature of life is that all living things must maintain homeostasis in order to survive. And homeostasis can be thought of as a type of like balancing act, or trying to stay in some sort of range that is crucial for life to exist. So temperature is just one example of that. But you take a human, for example. Humans have a body temperature of around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, around 37 degrees Celsius. But different animals can have different homeostatic ranges of that. My dog Luna here has a temperature probably around 101 or 102, and the desert iguana that I worked on has a body temperature when it's functioning of 90 to maybe up to 110 degrees. It can go even lower than that. So it ranges. And temperature is just one. You could do that with water and all kinds of other things, but all living things have some sort of ranges they have to stay in. All living things also use energy, and we'll talk more about that later on. Energy quite often in the form of like the food that we eat as an example of that, but all living things must take in energy and use it in one way or another. We'll discuss as we go. And there's other things on there as well. Also, life, when we talk about it, life is very organized. There's organizational levels as you move up. So if we take something like an elephant here, for example, an elephant, if you were to take it apart into different systems, you would have organ systems, or organs like maybe the circulatory system or the heart or the lungs. And then the other sort of functional part of that is, even though life is organized and it's made of parts, the parts interact, and we call this emergent properties, where when you take the interactions of the parts, you end up getting something like an elephant versus just having the parts. One of the analogies I like to use is to think about a car. And if you took apart your car, which I wouldn't do because I would never be able to put it back together, but if you have the parts of a car and you put it together incorrectly, you just have a bunch of parts to a car. But if you put it together correctly and the parts interact in a way, you get a method of transportation, for example. So life is kind of that way, where the parts can be broken down, but it's the interactions of the parts that create even greater sort of complexity to that. So if we take that elephant example, for example, you take a bunch of elephants together to make a population, and then maybe you take elephants and lions and zebras and a whole bunch of other sort of organisms. That makes the community level. And so there's interactions in the community level that don't exist when you're just dealing with one elephant. And then you can go the other direction, of course, and take the elephant and break it down into smaller parts. And you can go all the way down to things like talking about cells, which we talked about earlier, molecules, and all the way down to atoms. And even the atoms then are made up of parts. But in general, we don't really go, in biology at least, below the sort of atom level because we can get kind of everything we need right about there. So in the next video, we'll talk about the basic structures of atoms. Thank you.